A couple of years ago, a man walks into a sandwich shop in Delray Beach, Florida, and orders a meatball sandwich. So the owner starts to fix the meatball sandwich when all of a sudden the customer pulls out a gun and he says, "This is a stick-up, give me all the cash in the register." The owner of the shop puts down the meatball sandwich, looks at the gunman and says, "Listen, pal, we've had a really bad month." He says, "Business has been terrible. Would you do me a favor? Will you settle for $10 in the meatball sandwich?" Now, again, I'm not making this up. It was in the paper. He says, would you settle for $10 in the meatball sandwich? So the gunman says, "Are you out of your mind?" He says, "I got a gun here." He says, "I'm not settling for $10 in the meatball sandwich." He says, "I'm not settling for anything less than $20 in the meatball sandwich." So the owner says, "You got a deal." He gives him the $20. He gives him the meatball sandwich. And you know what it said in the newspaper? It said, "And the robber left satisfied." The point of the story, the reason I love to start off with this story is it takes courage. In our culture, it takes courage to negotiate. And my feeling is that if this fellow could negotiate a robbery, think of what the possibilities are for the rest of us. Always be willing to walk away from a negotiation. Another way of putting it is never negotiate unless you have options. Never negotiate without options. This is something that I learned when I was working for, I believe it was Litton Industries. We were selling this telecomputer type system, very sophisticated system, and I was a sales manager. My sales rep comes into my office. He says, "I've got a prospective buyer. The buyer says he'll sign the contract if we give him certain concessions." I went to the general manager of my company. I had to get special permission to give those concessions. I then went with my sales rep. We went into the buyer's office and we said, "Okay, you've asked us for these concessions and here we're giving them to you. So now would you please sign the contract?" Well, the customer says, "Just a minute," he says. "Before I sign the contract, I want this and I want that and I want..." Well, wait a minute, you never said anything about that. Here I had gone out on a limb for this guy, and now he was shafting me. Now I was going to look bad. I mean, first of all, I was going to look bad, to my boss. My credibility would be shot, and who knows what else he was going to ask for. So you know what I did? I didn't say a word. I had a bunch of stuff laid out on the table there. I had a calculator and papers and the contract. I started picking everything up and put it in my briefcase, and I got up and started to walk out. And the customer looks at me. He says, "Ed, what are you doing?" I said, "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm walking out." He says, "What do you mean you're walking out?" I said, "You know, you lied to us, and I don't want to do business with you." And he's looking at me in shock. No one had ever done this to him before, I'm sure. My poor sales rep is looking at me like, there goes my commission. And I leave. I walk out. Well, we're in one of these big New York City high-rise office buildings. I get to the elevator, and guess who comes charging down the hallway? The customer. He says, "Wait, Ed, wait, I'll sign the contract. I'll sign. So we go back into his office. He signs the contract. It takes us about an hour to get everything signed and copies made. And once it's all done, he says to me, "Ed, now that we've consummated the agreement," he said, "let me ask you something. If I hadn't followed you all the way out to the elevator, would you have come back?" And I looked at him with a little twinkle in my eye and I said, "You'll never know." And the fact is, I didn't even know the answer to that question myself until I thought about it. And I realized I had stumbled upon something very, very important, which is that you have to be willing to walk out. Now, mind you, I'm saying be willing to walk out. I'm not saying that you should walk out, because what happens is in so many negotiations, we are desperate. You're desperate. You need to sell. You need a car to get to work. You have to buy a car. You need a job. You have to accept. We feel that we have to make the deal. As soon as you do that, the other side is going to know that. They are going to sense it. They can feel it just the way an animal can feel that another animal is afraid. But when you say to yourself, "Hey, if I can't get the deal that I want, I'm going to take off. I'm going to walk out of here," you don't have to say a word. They get it. They understand. And they know that they're going to have to work harder in order to make the deal. As I get older and I learn more about negotiation, I am convinced more and more that this is the whole crux of the baby right there, is your willingness to walk away. I suggest to all my negotiators, think of yourself as a detective. And what do detectives do? They gather facts, they gather information. You've got to ask questions about the other side in the negotiation. And in fact, I have what I call the other strategy, the strategy of the other, which means instead of focusing on you and all of your problems and everything, focus on the other negotiator. Focus on the other negotiator. Let me tell you a story. I had an uncle, my Uncle Willie, lived to be 95 years old. He lived in upstate New York, very rural area. Shortly before he died, he used to take a walk every day. He's taking a walk in the woods. He was about 93 years old. And he's walking in the woods. He comes upon a frog. And the frog looks up at Uncle Willie and says, "Hey, old man, if you give me a kiss, I'll turn into a beautiful princess." Interesting offer, right? So Uncle Willie doesn't say a word. He picks the frog up, sticks the frog in his pocket, keeps on walking. So he's walking down the road. About a mile later, frog sticks its little head out of Uncle Willie's pocket and says, "Hey, old man, what about that kiss? Remember, I'll turn into a beautiful princess." And Uncle Willie says, I've been thinking about that, and frankly, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog. Well, he said it was a true story. I don't know. Point of the story is that we need to look at a negotiation not from our point of view, but from the other person's point of view. So while for us it might be, a beautiful princess, for the other negotiator it might be a talking frog. Always look at it from the other person's point of view. Now, at this point, I am going to tell you something that I think may be the most important thing I'm going to say all day, and that is the one question that you must all ask when you go into a negotiation, the most important question. And that is, what's the pressure on the other side in this negotiation? We tend to focus on our pressure. Oh, I can't, I have no power in this. I'm desperate to make a deal. They have all the power. Forget that. Just forget it. Say to yourself, what's the pressure on the other side in the negotiation? Why do they have to make the deal? Not why do I have to make the deal? Why do they have to make the deal? That's the key. And as you're doing that, you're going to start thinking about the other side, and you're going to say to yourself, how is the other side looking at this negotiation? What's their point of view?